There are moments in the history of a basketball program when the noise of public opinion and the clarity of basketball truth finally align. The Philippines is living inside one of those moments right now, and the sport, if you have been watching carefully, if you have given Gilas Pilipinas the sustained attention they have quietly demanded over the past several years, the sport has been building toward this reckoning for a long time. Chot Reyes is back. Say that again, slowly, and feel the weight of it. Not as a headline. Not as a press release soundbite. As a basketball fact that reshapes what the Philippines can realistically expect from its national program in the years immediately ahead. Because the conversation around Reyes, his methods, his stubbornness, his genius, his flaws, has never been a simple one, and anyone who frames it that way is not paying close enough attention. The man is not a folk hero, and he is not a villain. He is something rarer and more complicated, a coach who built something real, watched it be dismantled in his absence, and has now been handed the blueprints again. The Philippines has a basketball culture unlike anything else in Southeast Asia. This is not a country that merely watches the sport, it breathes it, argues about it across tricycle rides and sorry store conversations, passes it from generation to generation with the same reverence other nations reserve for football or cricket. The barangay courts never empty. The passion is structural, not seasonal. And yet, for decades, that passion ran ahead of the results. FIBA Asia competitions were the ceiling. The World Cup was a distant dream spoken about in the conditional tense. When the Philippines stood up on the international stage, the story was too often about heart and insufficient about execution. What changed, and this is the critical pivot that the return of Chot Reyes must be understood against, was not merely one coaching change or one talented player emerging. What changed was a philosophy, a willingness to play physical, organized, purposeful basketball. The kind that wears opponents down rather than simply trying to outrun them. The kind that requires a defensive identity rigid enough to survive bad offensive nights. There is a reason the Philippines national team earned the phrase, bully ball. It did not emerge accidentally. It was coached into them, drilled into them, demanded of them, particularly under Chot Reyes, whose offensive systems have always carried a certain structural intelligence, and whose defensive concepts, at their best, present challenges that smaller Asian nations simply lack the personnel to answer. The Philippines is not the biggest team on the FIBA Asia floor. They are rarely the most athletically gifted at the global level. But under the right coaching, they become the hardest team to play against. Tenacious on the boards, disciplined in their rotations, willing to impose physical costs that accumulate through 40 minutes. Strip away the politics, strip away the social media debates and the warring factions of Philippine basketball commentators, and what remains is this. The data of Chot Reyes' tenure supports his reinstatement in ways that are difficult to argue against honestly. His record in FIBA Asia competition is not merely good, it is historically significant for a program that spent the better part of the 20th century on the periphery of continental relevance. Under his leadership, the Philippines won multiple FIBA Asia championships, advancing from a nation that competed to a nation that contended, and eventually to a nation that expected to win. That shift in expectation, that internal rewiring of what Gilas believed it deserved, may be the most lasting and undervalued thing he ever gave the program. Expectations, in basketball, are not soft psychological phenomena. They are tactical realities. Teams that believe they should win play differently from teams that hope they might. They defend harder in the fourth quarter. They execute under pressure with something closer to calm than to desperation. The 2013 FIBA Asia Championship, where the Philippines won the title and secured an automatic World Cup berth, stands as the clearest exhibit of what a Reyes-led Gilas team looks like at its peak. That was not a lucky run. It was a systematic dismantling of the continental field by a team that had internalized its identity completely. Now consider the years of his absence. Consider what the program looked like when the coaching chair turned over and over, when the roster identity blurred, when bully ball became a nostalgic reference point rather than a living tactical reality. The Philippines' results did not collapse catastrophically. The infrastructure Reyes built had residual strength, but the coherence frayed. The opponents who once feared the physicality of a Gilas frontcourt found angles. The defensive clarity softened. And the Philippine basketball public, which has never lacked for passion or opinion, spent considerable energy debating whether the glory years were a product of the coach or the players or the era or some unreplicable combination of all three. The answer, as it so often is in basketball, is that those forces cannot be fully separated, but the coach is not incidental to them. The coach is the framework within which those forces either organize or dissolve. Reyes understood something about Philippine basketball that not every successor has grasped with equal precision. The talent pipeline is real, but it requires a specific development philosophy to produce results at the senior level. The country produces wing athletes with reasonable frequency, guards with craft and quickness, bigs who have improved their perimeter mobility considerably over the past decade. The naturalization program, the process by which players with Filipino heritage playing professionally abroad are integrated into the national team, adds layers of athleticism and size that the purely domestic pool cannot yet provide at FIBA's highest level. Managing that blend, making the naturalized player feel like a genuine extension of the team's identity rather than a bolted-on solution, is a coaching skill. It requires man management, tactical intelligence, and the kind of credibility in the locker room that cannot be manufactured. It must be earned over time. Chot Reyes has that credibility. Whether any given segment of the Philippine basketball audience wants to acknowledge it or not, the players know it. Veterans who have played under him carry it in how they describe his training camps, the standards, the repetition, the refusal to lower the bar because the clock was running. That is not nothing. In international basketball, where the national team window is brutally short, a handful of practice days strung across a tournament schedule designed to test depth and conditioning simultaneously, the coach who can establish culture in days rather than months is enormously valuable. The tactical profile of a Chot Reyes team deserves careful examination, because it is not simply about aggression. That is the surface reading. The deeper reality is that his offensive systems create specific types of problems for opponents. Ball screen actions that force defensive decisions at the point of attack, interior options that punish teams who hedge too aggressively, and three-point spacing built to stretch defenses that try to pack the paint. At the FIBA level, where zone defenses are more widely used than in the NBA and where isolation basketball is less reliably effective, the value of a coach who understands how to attack structured defenses with motion and timing becomes pronounced. Reyes has always built teams that move the ball with purpose, that use the dribble drive game to collapse defenses before kicking out to shooters whose mechanics are sound under pressure. Defensively, the bully identity starts at the point of attack and extends through every rotation. The Philippines has, under Reyes at his best, been one of the more disciplined help defense teams in the Asian competition. They do not gamble excessively for steals. They do not allow baseline drives because of broken positioning. They switch selectively and hedge judiciously, and the big men, crucial in any scheme that protects the paint without sacrificing perimeter coverage, have been coached to understand their positioning responsibilities in ways that make the whole system coherent. When that coherence breaks down, usually through personnel inconsistency or preparation time constraints, the vulnerability is exposed quickly. When it holds, Gilas is as difficult to score against as any team in the Asian pool. The matchup implications of this appointment extend in several directions. Within the FIBA Asia context, the nations who have historically given the Philippines the most competitive difficulty, China, with its size advantage, Australia at the Oceanic Conference level with its NBA-developed talent, and increasingly South Korea and Japan with their improved shooting and spacing, will each need to adjust their scouting reports. A Chot Reyes team is not a predictable Gilas team. It adapts its pace based on opponent, compresses the game when necessary, and can play half-court basketball with patience and competence that fewer Philippine teams have demonstrated historically. Australia, should the paths converge in a meaningful FIBA window, presents the most interesting puzzle. Their physicality is elite by regional standards, and they match up with the Philippines' brand of play in ways that other opponents simply cannot. The conversation around Kai Sotto merits its own careful attention here. Sotto's development arc, from teenage prospect with extraordinary physical gifts to a legitimate professional in the Philippine Basketball Association, now pressing toward his national team ceiling, runs directly through whatever tactical structure Reyes deploys at the 5. For Sotto, the Reyes appointment is potentially transformative. His footwork and skill development have matured meaningfully. His motor, always his calling card alongside his length, now comes packaged with considerably more post-sophistication and pick-and-roll awareness than the 17-year-old who first generated international notice. Under a system that demands intelligent reads from the center position, when to roll hard, when to pop for the mid-range, when to seal for the offensive board, Sotto has the tools to be genuinely impactful rather than merely impressive in highlights. The question has always been whether the scheme surrounding him gives those tools room to breathe. A Chot Reyes scheme, in its most refined form, does exactly that. The leadership dimension of this story is one that basketball analysis sometimes underweights in favor of tactical elegance, and that would be an error here. Reyes is not returning to a clean slate. He is returning to a program that has experienced significant internal navigation over the past several years. Different voices, different visions, the particular turbulence of an organization that cares enormously about the sport but has not always agreed on the path forward. His reappointment is, in one reading, an acknowledgement that the experiment of departure did not produce the forward momentum that its architects hoped for. That is not a comfortable institutional admission. The fact that it was made, that the decision-makers looked at the program honestly enough to return to the man they had moved away from, is itself a form of basketball maturity. It is easier to find a new name than to revisit a complicated one. The psychological contract between a returning coach and a national team program is delicate and specific. The players who experienced Reyes's first era understand what his standards feel like in their bones. The newer generation enters without that frame of reference. The bridge between those two experiences, maintaining the culture while integrating fresh energy, will be among the first tests of whether this reunion produces its best-case outcomes. Every coach who has gone away and come back to a major program has faced a version of this question. Is what you built still here, just waiting to be reactivated, or do you have to build it again from soil that has been tilled differently in your absence? Phil Jackson returned to coaching after his first run with the Bulls and built something extraordinary in Los Angeles. Don Nelson went away and came back more than once, with varying results. The pattern in basketball history is that returning coaches succeed when the underlying values of their system still resonate with the roster, and struggle when the roster has evolved in directions that their system cannot accommodate. The Philippines' current roster, its blend of PBA veterans with Final Four pedigrees, its naturalized contributors with professional experience in higher-level leagues, and its emerging younger domestic talent, is not misaligned with what Reyes builds. There is no fundamental schematic incompatibility waiting to fracture the project. The alignment between what this coach knows how to do and what this team is capable of doing is genuinely encouraging. The broader landscape of Philippine basketball is also, for perhaps the first time in the modern era, positioned to capitalize on a strong coaching appointment in a way that was not previously possible. The infrastructure investment in grassroots development, youth academies, provincial talent identification programs, the slowly improving pipeline between developmental leagues and the senior national team, means that Reyes is inheriting a deeper bench of options than his earlier iterations of Gilas possessed. The problem that plagued the program historically, the narrow band of truly national team-ready players from which to construct a competitive roster, has not been solved, but it has been meaningfully expanded. When the margin between a functioning bench and a thin one is the difference between winning a close tournament game and losing it in the fourth quarter, that expansion matters enormously. There are also structural changes in FIBA competition that reward the kind of programmatic consistency Reyes represents. The qualifying windows, the condensed tournament formats, the premium placed on teams that arrive with established schemes and practiced rotations, all of these tilt slightly toward coaches whose players know the system well enough to execute it under tournament fatigue. An unfamiliar coach working with an unfamiliar system in a compressed window produces compounding uncertainty. A returning coach whose veterans already speak his language produces a different kind of team chemistry. One that performs at something closer to its ceiling on short preparation time, because the foundation was laid years ago and only needs to be reactivated rather than constructed. And then there is the question of what Reyes himself brings back that experience has sharpened. He is not the same coach who first led this program. Coaches who go away and work, whether in the PBA or in analysis or in the uncomfortable laboratory of watching from the outside, come back with perspective they could not have acquired while inside the structure. The angles you cannot see when you are in the building become visible when you stand outside it. If Chot Reyes has spent the intervening period asking himself hard questions about what his coaching did not prepare his teams for, about which opponents exposed weaknesses he did not address quickly enough, about which roster-building decisions he would revisit, and there is every reason to believe a man of his competitive intelligence has done exactly that, then what returns to the Gilas bench is not a replica of the original. It is a refined version, tested by time, carrying both the scars and the lessons. Somewhere in the long arc of Philippine basketball, in the crowded gymnasiums of the 1950s and 1960s when the Philippines was actually among Asia's elite programs, through the decades of decline when neighbors caught and then surpassed them, through the rebuilding years when Reyes first arrived and began the slow work of cultural reconstruction, somewhere in that arc, this moment was always going to come. Not inevitably, and not without real costs along the way. But the sport has a gravitational pull toward its own best possibilities, and the Philippines has been pulling in this direction for a long time. What does the next 5 years look like from here? The honest answer is that it contains more questions than certainties, but the nature of the questions has changed. The program is no longer asking whether it belongs on the FIBA Asia stage. That was settled years ago. The question now is what ceiling Gilas can reach when its best personnel and its most coherent coaching converge in a single window. Can the Philippines qualify for a FIBA World Cup on merit, through the Asian qualifying rounds, with a Reyes-built team that is confident in its identity and battle-tested in the format? The answer is not guaranteed. But for the first time in a considerable period, the structural ingredients for a yes answer are all present simultaneously. The naturalization conversation will continue. It always does. Every nation that uses eligibility rules to add athletes with familial connection to its national roster generates debate about authenticity, and the Philippines is not exempt from that friction. But the history of international basketball is dotted with programs transformed by carefully integrated naturalized talent, and Reyes, who has managed that integration before, understands that the psychological work of making a naturalized player feel genuinely Filipino, not imported, not borrowed, but ours, is part of the coaching assignment. It is not a byproduct of talent. It is a deliberate construction. The great open question that this appointment cannot yet answer is whether Gilas has a genuine shot at a gold medal at the Asian Games or an automatic World Cup berth in the coming cycle. The Philippines has come close before, close enough to feel the texture of that moment, to understand what it would mean. Every generation of Gilas that falls short hands the obligation and the hunger to the next one. The players currently in this program carry something cumulative, not just their own ambitions but the weight of the near misses before them. That is not a burden. That is a gift, actually. It is the sport's way of telling a new group that the goal is real and reachable, because someone before them almost reached it. Chot Reyes knows this. He has lived inside the Philippines basketball story long enough to understand what this appointment means beyond the tactical and the administrative. He is not simply filling a coaching vacancy. He is accepting stewardship of something fragile and precious, a national basketball identity that took decades to construct and that requires the right conditions to achieve what it is capable of. Whether this reunion produces the championship that has eluded this program, or whether it contributes one more layer of foundation for a generation that comes after, the sport rarely ties those answers up cleanly, and the Philippines knows that better than most. What the program has, right now, is a coach who belongs in that chair. A team that plays like a bully in the best possible sense, physical, purposeful, unafraid. And a country watching, the way it always watches, with a love for this game so deep it borders on the irrational. The sport has been building toward something in the Philippines for a long time. Exactly what that something is, that part is still being written.